First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. It really is. I come for the opening of the legal year, normally in January, and then a conference. And it is it is really great to be here. And thank you to the SAL for inviting both the Minister and me here today. As the Minister says, it's 25 years ago, virtually to the day, that he came to be my pupil in London. I think you may have seen this online, but I would like to present to you, right at the beginning, a photograph of 1999 was the year that I was 25 years in practice in London. In fact, I made an arithmetical error. In fact, it was only 24 years. I organized this big dinner, and I was told I was a fraud, because, in fact, it was only 24 years, but it was about 25. And anyway, you will see, I'm not sure you can see it all, but there I am, looking rather dusty, and there's a fine, young, handsome Edwin Tong, as he was then, with a beaming smile, and I invited all my pupils, and my university professor, and in fact 2 teachers from my school, old school, to celebrate 24 years in practice. Anyway, I remember Edwin as a young man. We were both young, but he was quite young then. I can't remember how young. With a beaming smile. He was a terrific pupil. He really was, even when he went off to see Manchester United. And I remember him as a hard-working, excellent pupil. I'm surprised, I don't know whether he will show it to you in a minute maybe, but he even has, unlike me, he even has his notebook that he had when he was a pupil, or at least one of the notebooks that he showed me, that he still has here.
Yeah, I went to look it up. And I'm a hoarder, obviously. But I've got all my notes from the first time I met Bernard. So
it's worth a lot of money now, I should say.
So I sort of proudly wrote there, Edwin Tong, Essex Court Chambers, many years ago now, 25 years ago. Oh, you can't hear?
They can't hear. Hello.
That's what turn it on. How do you turn this on?
Hello. Push it at the bottom. Is it working? It's working. It's working.
So now David tells me that this is probably was and still is Essex Court Chambers property.
So that is my impression of the Minister. I'm told that I'm obliged to tell you my dog story. I do a lot of work with students in London. You all look very, very young here. Oh, very, very young. Even Michael Wang, I should say, he looks very young. Everyone looks young. And I really enjoy working with pupils. And I always say it, I'm an old man. I would change where I am today for any of you youngsters, really. You have your lives ahead of you. And that is very, very important. My children, I have 5 children, they all think I'm a very boring lawyer. When I became a High Court judge in London, one of the things that you do is you sit for 7 days, and in fact 7 nights, 24 hours a day, in the emergency court. And anyone in London, or in England, can phone up the High Court and say there is an emergency, and you've got to deal with it straight away. Either in court or during the night, 24 hours a day on the phone. So one of my cases, late on a Friday, an old man came into court, a litigant in person. He was dirty, bedraggled, unshaven, a dirty raincoat, and I wanted to go home. It was already, I think, 5 or 5:30, and I said, well, what do you want? In a rather grumpy way, I should say. And he said, this is the story he told. He said, I've fallen on hard times, and I have a friend, I live on the streets in London, and I have a friend who has a dog. And the friend has gone missing, and the dog has been running around the street. So I've taken the dog to the dog pound. Do you have dog pounds here, I imagine? Or
yep.
Dog pound, that's what we call it in England. And they've told me today, and I'm saying, so what? What do you want me to do about it? So he says, the dog pound has told me that they are going to kill the dog tomorrow at 10 o'clock, because they only keep dogs for 7 days, and after that, they put the dog down. Now, the story is important because it tells you something about the judicial mind. I was determined to save this dog, if I possibly could. And we talked about it. He made some submissions, but I mean, I'm assuming you're all lawyers here. Actually, this raises a very, very difficult legal point, because this man doesn't own the dog. He has no possessory interest in the dog. And more than that, if I grant an injunction against the dog pound to stop them killing the dog, normally, I think in Singapore as well, when you grant an injunction, the plaintiff has to give a cross-undertaking in damages, and it's got to be worth money. And although requiring the dog pound to look after the dog for 7 days isn't a lot of money, there's a question of principle, of cross-undertaking and security, and this man had no money. So there was a cause of action problem, and there was a security problem on the cross-undertaking in damages. And the Chief Justice told me in London when I was appointed is, take a little time if you have a difficult case. So I walked behind, I said, well, I'll think about it. I went to the back of the court, and the back of the court outside, there's in England, we have Halsbury's Laws of England. There are about, I don't know, 100 volumes, alphabetical, A to Z. So I thought, I looked at this, I remember this now, there must be an answer there that tells me how I can grant this injunction. So I thought D for dog. So I looked under D for dog. I take the volume down, I open it, nothing about a dog. But I had a brilliant idea that a dog is an animal. So I looked under A for animal. And I found, believe it or not, a case in, I think it was 1752, about the rights of a finder of a dog on the streets of London. I took the volume of Halsbury's, I went back into the court, and I delivered a brilliant judgment saving the dog. I should tell you, I fudged the question of the security on the cross undertaking, and don't worry about that too much. Anyway, I went home, the dog, I granted the injunction. I went home that evening to my children, who all think I'm a boring lawyer, and I told them this story, I was Superman, they said. I was super judge, they said. And so whenever anyone asks me what is the best case I've done, I think it is that one, because it tells you a lot of things about the judicial mind, I think, and for young people and even older people. I think judges want to find the right answer, if possible, and they want to be given the route to the right answer, if possible, a legal route to it. And although I fudged the cross-undertaking, that was all right, I think. So anyway, so that was my best case. I don't know whether, it wasn't during the time that the minister was with me, but that was my great case. So my children all call me the super judge.
Actually, it's not just about the judicial mind. I think that story illustrates the kind of person, the kind of lawyer, the kind of forensic lawyer. And dare I say, when he fights on an argument, no pun intended, he doesn't let go. And the reality is that when you have to research a case for him, which I used to do a lot of, no answer, wrong answer was never an answer. And you had to find the case, you had to find the authority, you got to find the principle. And it was difficult, I must say it was difficult. I spent many, many hours in his chamber after he had gone, off for hearings and consultations, trying to do precisely what I thought he would want me to do. And I think that is something that stayed with me over the years. It's about looking at all sides of a problem, looking at not accepting no, not accepting cannot do for an answer, and trying to persevere in the client's interest. He was, of course, on the bench then, but when I knew him, he was counsel. And he had many, many cases where he was told it's going to be a dead case, not possible, not winnable. Many of the instructing solicitors came to him and said, it's a really difficult case. I've been turned down several times by other barristers. Would you consider, would you do it? And he would take it back, he would say, I'll look at it. And in our private discussions in chambers, he kept saying there must be an answer. In the same way as he went to Halsbury's to look for D for dog. And that's a lesson that stayed with me over the years. It's about listening to all sides of the story, trying to find a solution, trying to press, and eventually you will get, even if you can't find the answer, you will find something that will allow you to break through, overcome the hurdle and overcome the challenge. And that's something that stayed with me even beyond my pupillage with Bernard into my own practice. It's a culture, it's an ethos that I had. And even now, when I am in politics, looking at problems, society, how do we deal with policy, how does one policy affect the other, and trying to find answers. That same kind of determination, that same kind of let's not give up until we've heard all sides of the story has been a very important part of what I do.
I think that's absolutely, you're right. But I think there is no substitute, I'm afraid, for hard work. If I look back at my own career, I don't know about the minister, but in a way I've worked too hard. But there is no substitute for working hard. I told you my greatest case. Maybe I can tell you just for 1 second, 1 minute, my worst case. Well, not my worst case, because we won it in the end, actually. But I went into court.
You must have, because you don't lose a case.
I never did that, no. But I go into court, a really difficult problem, a very difficult problem. And I don't know, in Singapore, I think normally counsel stands up. I was the plaintiff. You stand up and you introduce yourself. You say, I act for one party or the other. Anyway, I stood up and I said, in this case, and I'd completely forgotten which side I was on. It was a shipping case between owners and charterers. I do remember that. And I got up and I said, in this case, I act for the, for the owners, I said, rather proudly. And my opponent leant over to me and said, you don't. You act for the charterers. And I said, oh, I do act for the charterers, I said. And my opponent was furious because he thought this was a big ploy by me.
No, he shouldn't have been furious. He should have kept quiet.
And let me
make all the arguments for the owners.
So I said to the judge, the truth is, I said, and this is another lesson, always be truthful. Never hide the truth. And I said to the judge, I'm really sorry. It's such an interesting question, the issue in this case, that I have completely or had completely forgotten which side I was on, because I want to know what the answer is. Anyway, the judge looked at me as if I was a complete idiot. My opponent thought that I was just trying to ingratiate myself to the judge. We did. We won at first instance. We lost in the Court of Appeal, and we won it back in what was then the House of Lords. It was a case about $25,000. And we had tried to settle it, couldn't settle it. So we went to the House of Lords, and it is one of the great shipping cases in England. So, truthful, hard work, and I suppose, if I may say so, enjoy yourself. When you get to my age, you've got to be able to look back and say you've done good. And that is really important for me, I think, that you've done good and done it in a good spirit. I don't think I've probably done 1,000 cases, something like that. I don't think I've ever had a real disagreement with any of my opponents as counsel. So I think that is very important as well. Professional relationships.
That's right.
Even if you're on the other side, even if the other side is beastly to you, and they can be beastly, you've got to maintain your, I'm not sure, professional dignity in a proper way. Fight every case as hard as you can, but be truthful all the way. I mean, I don't know if you know, from England, there's this scandal about the post office prosecutions. It's a complete scandal, and at the core of that is lawyers who lied or didn't do their professional duty properly, and it is a scandal. It is even worse than that. So, truthfulness, hard work is the answer, and have some fun. Those are the 3 pillars of my life.
I really agree with that. I mean, for us, many of us here in this room, litigators, you see, you're in a conflict every day, right? You're dealing, with issues and your clients on your back. The judge is not always the most friendly party in the room. And your opponent, of course, is waiting to just chomp at you, right? Every time you make a mistake and so on. Like pretending to act for your opponent's client every once in a while. But I think it's important to maintain a sense of decorum as counsel. For us to always understand that, we're all members of the bar, treat each other with respect. And at least in my time, when I was in court, we would have difficult cases. We'll, push our client's case to the max. Sometimes that means, really attacking the other side, bordering on a little bit of animosity. But we always found time to have a coffee or share a drink after, catch up, have a word. And I think that's important because we maintain those relations. You may be on opposite sides of the bar table one day, another day you'll be on the same side. But fundamentally, I think we're all members of the same profession. So that was important for me. But to add to Bernard's list of qualities, I want to add one more. I think he is completely, utterly dedicated and devoted to the interests of the client in the case. And I saw that for myself, not when I was his pupil, but a couple of years later, I had the pleasure of instructing him as counsel. And I think, Bernard, you might remember this. It was an arbitration. Your mother wasn't well. And in fact, I think shortly after the case, she passed on. And you were finishing the case. And you refused to let your own medical emergency, your mother's medical emergency, stand in the way. And you were acting for a client from Singapore. We had a case, an arbitration against a Japanese party in London. And you finished the case. You practically left me only to pack up your papers because you had to rush off. And that really made an impression on me because throughout the case, it was a week and a half, right? I could see you were, obviously your mind was somewhere else, quite rightly, but you were 101% dedicated to the interests of the client. Whatever happened in your own personal life, you didn't allow that to compromise the interests of your client in court, in the arbitration. And I thought that was something that stood out for me very much because not everyone will have the same quality.
Do you regret that?
Do I regret that? You're asking me. Can we speak afterwards or not? the short answer is, do I regret that? I have 5 children. And if I regret anything in my life, it is not spending enough time with my children when they were young. So virtually every Sunday I would be working. I would always, if I could, come home by 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening after court. I would never, I say never, generally never stay late. I'd leave Edwin in the room. And I'd always go home and try and have supper with them and then read to them or play football in the summer for an hour or two. And then I would start again at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night and work through the night. So, but if I regret anything, it's that. But otherwise I've had a blessed life. I've had doing incredibly interesting work. I've met a whole lot of interesting people. I'm going to call you a friend, if I may, Paul, at the back of the room. He's a solicitor, used to be at Holman, Fenwick and Willan, and we did a lot of cases together, Paul Aston, and we had fun. But do I regret things? Life is a compromise. You're always juggling with different pressures on you. A whole lot of different pressures. So, but otherwise, I've had a blessed life.
Can I please tell the story of more recently, when you were acting as an arbitrator in London, that you arrived an hour late in the morning, as arranged, and then confessed that you'd just been to your daughter's wedding and left the reception.
Well,
do you regret that?
But let me more serious. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. But let me just go back because I see again a lot of young faces here. In terms of tips, I don't think any of you have appeared in front of me in the SICC, but one of the problems with the lawyers in Singapore is that they are too deferential. They're too nice to the judge in a way. So if I ask a question, they make a submission, and I want to probe it. I want to know whether it is right or wrong. So you may think I'm being difficult. I'm not being difficult with you. I'm being difficult with your argument because I want to know whether it's right or not. And that's what I want to know. And too often in Singapore, unlike in London, they're not rude, but they come back, they engage with the argument. Whereas here, too often I hear the words, "It's a matter for your honour." And that drives me bonkers, because it is a matter for me. I know that, I really do. But it's a matter for you to tell me what your case is. And don't be shy from telling the tribunal what your case is. You may think it's a rubbish case, I don't know. But don't be a shrinking violet in court. be polite and put your argument. Don't make it 100 times. Make it once. That's all. Judges aren't stupid, really. I promise you, they're not stupid. Make it. I remember a case I did in London in front of who then became, at first he was John Thomas, who then became Lord Thomas. And it was about 3:45 in the afternoon, I remember, and he was completely against me. I knew I was going to lose. And many judges say, well, and he asked me, well, when is this case going to finish? It's 4:45, we normally finish at 4:15. When is it going to finish? And I said to him, and I'm not sure I should have said this to him, I said to him, we are not leaving this court, I said, until you realise that we are right and you are wrong. All right? And we stayed till 6:30 that night. It never happened, I don't think. I'm not sure it ever happens in London. And we won the case, and he realised he was wrong. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that you tell any of the judges.
I think they were going to record you. And then the next time they make a case like this in the Court of Appeal.
But I do think it's important for Singapore, for advocacy in Singapore, that you make your case short and to the point to help the judge. And my usual statement in London is, if it's long, it's wrong. If it's long, it's wrong. So when I say make your case, it doesn't mean you've got to say it in 100 pages or 3 hours or something. The best advocates in London are the shortest advocates. And there's this great story, I don't know whether it's Mark Twain or someone who writes a letter and saying, I'm sorry that this letter is so long. I haven't had enough time to write a short letter. So when you put in your submissions, go through it again and again and again, and take out every word that doesn't matter, every word that doesn't really matter, and your submissions will be the stronger for it. So every time you write your submissions, remember what I've said. If it's long, it's almost certainly wrong. And whether that's right or not, it may be an overstatement, but it certainly could be much better if it were shorter. So bear that in mind. My tips. I was told to come here to give you tips. Tips.
Well, Bernard, can I switch gears a little bit and ask you this? I mean, this is your 50th year of practice, plus minus 1 or 2, because
Yes.
you got the dates wrong for your anniversary, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay, so about 50 years, right?
Yeah.
So you've seen, I mean, you started practice in 75, I'm told. So you've seen the days when... so it's mid-70s. So you've seen, technology move by very quickly. You've seen changes in the way businesses are done. You've seen the growth of globalization. Of course, now we are in a very different time as well. But what is your sense of practice today in the context of the world today, the world we see it, versus when you first started practice? And do you see, when I have a dialogue with young lawyers, they always tell me, technology will take over us. We'll have no more lawyers. We don't need lawyers anymore because of generative AI. What's your view on that?
Funny enough, I've had a conference at the SICC, and one of the big topics has been AI. And the universal view was, maybe it's right or wrong, is that the judges will always be there. Generative AI may help on certain points, but ultimately you will still need the judges. I gave a speech in Dubai about 2 months ago, the question being, must, and the important word is must arbitrators apply the law? Must arbitrators apply the law? And it's quite a difficult and very, very interesting topic. Very interesting topic. So I didn't know what to do. I thought I didn't know what the answer was, although I've done many arbitrations. And I thought I'd ask ChatGPT what the answer was. And it gave me a brilliant answer. Whether it was right or not, I'm not sure. And I started off the speech in Dubai saying, I don't know really what the answer to this is, but this is what ChatGPT says. And the answer is, arbitrators are not bound to follow the law at all. And that's a complicated question. So my short answer is, AI, it will help on a whole lot of topics, but ultimately, the judges have a humanity there. They want to save the dog. Would AI save the dog? I'm not sure. But the big difference, of course, is when I started off, I think, when the minister came it was after this, but when I went to court, it was trial by ambush. There were no witness statements, there were no affidavits, there were very short pleadings, and you went to court not knowing what the witnesses, well, you didn't know what witnesses, if any, would be called. Either if you were a plaintiff or a defendant. If you knew your opponent well, you might phone the opponent up in the evening before and say, look, can you tell me if you're going to call any witnesses and who they might be? And if you do that, I will tell you who I'm going to call. But if you had I don't mean a difficult opponent, but a strong opponent, he might say no. So you would go to court in the morning. There would be no written submissions. You'd have very short pleadings. No written submissions, no witness statements. You would have no idea who's being called. And you would go to court not really knowing what would happen. So in Pakistan, and each case is a learning curve. I always tell myself, I wish I knew at the beginning of the case, or I wish I had known at the beginning of the case what I eventually came to know by the end of the case. Not only that, but technical cases, well, witnesses and different businesses and different legal points. I remember doing a case in the Court of Appeal where I knew there was an answer. There had to be an answer. So I spent 2 days in the basement of Lincoln's Inn Library. I don't know if any of you know that, but it's dusty, there are no windows, and I was determined to find the answer. Couldn't find it in any textbook. And I found it in I think it was Roscoe's Admiralty Practice. The last edition, I think, was 1894. It stopped there. And I found the answer in a footnote on, I think, page 200 or something like that. And the answer was there. Anyway, I go to the court, we're in the Court of Appeal. And as I say, 2 days in the library. And I'm coming to this. And I say something incredibly stupid to the Court of Appeal. I said, I'm coming now to this page, and I want you to know this is the highlight of my life, I say. I found the answer. And I remember the Court of Appeal judge saying to me, you've had a very sad life, he said, if that is the highlight of your life. Anyway, anyway, that's another case I've done.
Well, switching gears slightly again. So in the 6 months I've been with you, I saw you work with a number of different juniors. Joe Smuha stood out for me. He was a junior. Geraldine Andrews, I think we had a couple of cases with both of them. They've of course gone on to become QCs and KCs in their own right.
And Geraldine Andrews is in the Court of Appeal.
Court of Appeal now, yeah. So how what do you make of mentoring young lawyers? Many lawyers have asked me about how is it that you got an opportunity to work with so and so and so and so, and what was it like, and did it have make an impact on your own career? From your perspective, how important is mentoring for a young lawyer? And in the context of practice today, in post-COVID environment, where you have many cases, and I think it is still the case here, where you have a lot of Zoom hearings, it's not in person. You therefore don't end up traveling to court in the same way as you and I used to do, where you would, of course, walk very fast and talk very fast, and I'll try to catch up with you. But I did learn something on that journey, and I used to as well when I followed my pupil master around in Singapore from place to place in a taxi. You get sort of nuggets of advice and information, but you don't have that anymore. So how do you see the role of a master like yourself and the impact that you can make on a pupil without that face-to-face interaction?
I'm going to cry, okay? I'm going to cry.
No, please don't.
It's the best thing. It really is the best thing, seeing young people who come in a bit nervous perhaps, not sure. They've all got, I don't know, first-class degrees and stuff. They're not great. And you see them grow and blossom. And next to me on my right is one of my blossoms, in a way. I mean, my career, whatever it is like, is nothing like the minister's. I mean,
oh, no.
Pardon? I mean, nothing like the minister's. And it gives me great pleasure. It really does. So I have probably, I don't know, a number of Joe Smuhard, David Foxton, Stephen Berry, a whole lot of fantastic KCs, one of them is now a judge, and it gives me huge pleasure to see the young people flourish. Everything they've learned, everything they can do comes from me, obviously. We say nothing at all about that. But I think, if I may say, it's the other way round. They may learn something from me, whatever it is, but I like to learn a lot from them as well. Again, going back to your question about regretting, I think perhaps I was a bit too harsh on my pupils sometimes, maybe. I don't know whether the minister is being unduly kind. I see my clerk, David Grief, who I've known now for almost 40 years, who kind of has lived with me day and night and looked after me. And thank you, David, for all of that. And thank you for being here today. But Joe Smoohar, for example, tells me that the first 2 or 3 weeks as my pupil, he worked for 3 days on a set of papers and produced what he thought was a brilliant opinion and advice. Anyway, I take it home that night, I work through the night, I come back, the opinion was not great, I have to tell you. Anyway, he tells this story, which I don't remember, so I think this is completely untrue. So I came in and Joe said, well, what do you think of my work? And I looked at him rather sadly. This is what his evidence, okay, his evidence. And he tells me that I picked up the opinion like this, and I said, I'm afraid it wasn't great. Would you like it back, I said. And he said to me, no. His evidence then goes on and says that I tore the opinion up and threw it in the bin. But he is now the best, or one of the best, KCs in London. So you have one of the greatest ministers sitting next to me, you have the greatest KCs, they've all learnt it all from me, I think. And I think, if anything, again, I keep on thinking of your question, I don't know your name, but do I regret anything? I think I regret aiming for perfection. It had to be perfect. It had to be perfect. And if it wasn't perfect, it wasn't good enough. And when you are standing up in court, it's no good saying, oh, I've got to research this point. You've got to be, as counsel anyway, being an arbitrator is much easier, Michael, isn't it, I think? But as counsel, when the judge asks you a question, you've got to be able to answer it. I remember doing a case in the House of Lords before Lord Gough, Robert Gough, who was one of the great judges, a difficult case, which I lost in the Court of Appeal, and we won it in the House of Lords. One of the great cases is called the Dominique, a really important case. And I remember Lord Gough looking at me and saying to me, could you, and he was the sweetest judge you could imagine, he said to me, Mr. Eder, could you tell me the difference between misperformance, non-performance, substantial non-performance, and something else I can't remember. And he said, it's now 4:15, perhaps you can help me tomorrow morning. Anyway, so I go home, scratch my head, and you're before 5 of the great lawyers in England, including Robert Gough, and you come back in the morning, and I made a speech for about half an hour on the difference of those categories, at the end of which he didn't interrupt me, he looked at me, and he says, I'm pleased to say that was my view all along, he said, and thank you very much. So it's got to be perfect. You've got to go back and look at it again and again, shorten it, sharpen it, but make your arguments. Don't be shy in making your arguments. So I'm not sure I'm answering your questions. I hope I am. But again, I do say I enjoy mentoring. I do a lot of work with students. Oh, not a lot so much now, but I do quite a bit of work with my students. I teach in Paris at the Sorbonne. I teach in different places in England. I work with students. I'm very interested in social mobility, where young people from a deprived background, they haven't been able to study maybe, and they want to be lawyers. I work with 15, 16-year-olds of that kind. And every time I go back, or I used to go back, I've stopped doing it now for various reasons, I was always ask, and I give the prizes, and they've been working for a year. And I always say to the organisers, well, you know, what shall I tell them this year? What do they want to know? And they always say to me, the organisers, tell them the dog story. Tell them the dog story, because that really, and so every year they say they love the dog story, because it shows what life is really about, what judges really do. And children of 15, 16, they have no real idea of what judges do. And finding the right answer as a judge is often not difficult. And the dog case is relatively simple, but the route to get there is difficult. So your short answer to the question, I love working with students. It's terrific because they challenge you. It's like my grandchildren. They challenge me. I say to them and they go, why? And you kind of go, well, you know, it's raining, I don't know, because there are clouds. Why are the clouds up there? They constantly challenge you. And I don't know, it keeps me young being challenged the whole time. I love working with students.
That's what the judges keep telling us all the time when we make a submission. Why? Where's it from? Yeah. Who says? Anyway, I before I open up the questions on the floor, I thought I'll show you some pictures which will give you a bit of, you know, color to what we've been talking about. Okay, so I think it's up here.
Have these been censored or not?
So, no, I left your chambers with a picture of the Royal Courts of Justice because I remember the first time you told me to meet you in a particular court, I got completely lost. And I think I turned up after the hearing finished. I don't think you noticed, but I'm confessing to you now, because I was supposed to bring your bag with the files, but you obviously managed to do the hearing without the bag. But I thought I'll confess that now. And next picture shows you what I mean. Neatness is not your forte. So the day I came in, he was hidden behind one of those boxes or the files. I did not see him. And there were days when I sat across him in this room here, he didn't know I was there. And so I decided to take a picture of myself to show you that on some days I was there. I think you sat next to the fireplace, which is on the left of this picture. And this was before you moved upstairs. This is on your basement or ground floor, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's me on your seat when you got home. I think this picture was taken by Joe Smuha many years ago. And I took a picture here to show you that was your room, the window. And after a while I discovered that you could get into his chambers, from the outside by climbing through the window. So there were days when I didn't want to disturb him, or I came late, and I climbed in through the window and he didn't know I was there. Or I left his chambers and he didn't know I left. This was the night of your famous party.
Oh, right.
I didn't have a tuxedo then, so I had to rent one. And so here I am in my tiny little apartment. That's all of my apartment, by the way. And this then was the picture that you talked about earlier. So that was a very, very good 6 months that I spent with you, Bernard, and I thank you very much. That was me looking completely bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. That's Bernard there in the middle, you can see, the dashing young man, 24 years in practice.
Great. Well, we'll destroy some of those photographs.